Okay, so this is chapter 5, the integumentary system, part 2. So in part 1, we talked about the cutaneous membrane, the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis, and the different layers. We talked about the fascia, and now we're in the rest of the integumentary system, which consists of the accessory structures. So that would be the hairs, the follicles, which house and grow the hairs, your sebaceous glands, sweat glands, ceruminous glands, mammary glands. And all of these structures happen to have become from embryonic epidermis. Now, we're not going to talk a whole lot about developmental biology until anatomy 2, but that's just kind of like an interesting fact. They all start in the dermis, but they all must come outside of the epidermis and be somewhat visible, or at least have a projection outside of the skin like a duct. So we saw this diagram earlier in the chapter in the first PowerPoint. So here is my epidermis again from this wiggly layer here. This would be my stratum basal, this first row of cells, and then all the way up to the stratum corneum. And then we have, this is our papillary layer of the dermis, this upper part here up until like this blood vessel line. And we see a change in the tissue right about here, and it changes from areolar to dense irregular. So this is now the reticular layer of the dermis down to the second blood vessel line. And then this area at the bottom where all of the yellow fat is the hypodermis. The accessory structures would be the hair follicle and the hair shaft and things associated with the hair like the sebaceous gland and the Arrector pili muscle and sweat glands. And then we'd also have nails. Now, hair covers almost all of our bodies because we are mammals. The only places we don't have hair are the palms of our hands, the sides of our fingers, the sides and soles of our feet, the sides of our toes, our lips, and portions of our external genitalia. Everywhere else has hair on it. Now, the job of this hair is to protect us and to insulate us, to help keep us warm. We are mammals after all. To guard openings from insects and particles getting in. And most of our hairs have a nerve ending attached to the bottom, so if they wiggle, we feel them moving, so they serve as sensory receptors. The follicle is what grows the hair. It's deep in the dermis, and it produces hair. Now, hair is not alive, it's why we can cut it and it doesn't hurt, but it is attached to the follicle at the bottom, so if you pluck a hair, it does hurt. Now, the hair follicle has a dense connective tissue sheath around it, and it has sensory nerves called the root hair plexus. It also has an Arrector pili muscle. These are tiny little muscles attached to every hair follicle, and when they contract, they stand your hairs on end. That gives you goosebumps. Now, there's 2 reasons why we get goosebumps. We're cold or we're scared. And so we believe this might have been an evolutionary holdover for when we had a lot more thicker hair all over our bodies. So let's talk about the first one. You're cold. So if your hair was very much thicker than it is now, and you were in a cold climate, if you stood your hair up, you kind of added another layer onto your body, because you'd have the surface of the hair, then you'd have a layer of air trapped under your hair on top of your skin, and then your skin would begin. So that would be a good way to insulate, to stand your hairs up, but they're still kind of rubbing against each other, so they can trap a layer of air around your skin that can help keep you warm. Okay, the second reason we get goosebumps is because we're scared. Now, I wonder how many of you have a cat or have ever seen a scared cat. So when a cat gets scared, it puffs its hair out. It puffs up because it's trying to get bigger to try to intimidate whatever it is that's scaring it. Now, we can't really do that anymore. If I was standing up front in class, I'd be like, am I scarier now? Probably not. But those are just 2 possible reasons why we even have these Arrector pili muscles. Otherwise, they don't really do anything for us today. Now, the region of the hair, we have the hair itself. So we have the follicle that grows the hair, but then it produces these layers of proteins, and the bottom part is called the hair root. That's what's in the follicle under the skin. All of the hair that is sticking out above the skin, the part that you can see and touch, is called the hair shaft. So here's a diagram from the book. So here's the follicle. You can see the connective tissue covering. You can see the Arrector pili muscle. That was one of your lab terms, so make sure you can spell that correctly. And then you can see the layers of the follicle. And then you can see way down inside here, the hair. So this part would be the hair root. And then once we break through the skin, everything on top would be the hair shaft. So you can also see the hair root is here. Okay. The nervous system is attached here. That's the root hair plexus. Now, if we look at a hair, it has 3 layers. In the very middle, we have the medulla. And then outside of that, we have a ring called the cortex. And then outside of that, we have a layer called the cuticle. Now, this set of, besides cuticle, but cortex and medulla, we'll see in a lot of organs too. Medulla always means middle. So if you can kind of hear medulla and think middle, it will help you out. Cortex, although it sounds like core, usually means it's around the middle. It's like a layer around the middle. Now, when you make a hair, it starts at the hair bulb, which is in the base of the hair follicle, and it starts out surrounding the hair papilla. Okay, that's where we have capillaries and nerves. You need oxygen and nutrients and amino acids and things to build the hair. Then we have a layer of epithelial cells that's called the hair matrix, and they're the ones that actually start producing the hair proteins. So as they produce the proteins, kind of like fibroblasts produce fibers, the hair is much bigger than the cells producing the protein. So they begin pushing them out, and then the hair gets pushed up and up and up and up until it sticks out through the skin. Now, you have 2 kinds of hair on your body. You have the soft hair that, especially if you're pale, might be very light in color and kind of spread out. That's called vellus hair. And then you have the hair that usually has a lot more pigment in it, and it's on places like the top of your head and your eyebrows and your eyelashes. Those are called terminal hairs. And then you grow additional terminal hairs in your armpits and in your pubic region after puberty. Okay, those are also terminal hairs, pubic hairs and armpit hairs. Now, your color of your hair, just like the color of your skin, is determined by your genes and which shades of melanin you are putting into the hair. So you use the same hair pigments, the same pigments as you stain your skin to stain your hair. Give it color. Unless, of course, your hair has gone gray. Now, this is the bad news about gray hair or white hair. You don't have any pigment in it. In fact, everywhere you would have put in pigment, your hair puts in an air bubble, which is why gray or white hair is coarser and more brittle and more prone to break than a pigmented hair. All right, so let's move on to the glands. You have several exocrine glands in your skin. Remember, an exocrine gland must have a duct that carries a secretion up to the surface. So the first exocrine gland is a sebaceous gland or oil gland. And they are going to use the hair in the follicle as a wick. So you notice they are hooked onto the side of the hair follicle. If you go back to that skin image here, let's see here. Let's go back. There we go. Oh, so here is my sebaceous gland. And so it's going to create sebum, and it's a holocrine gland, so the cells here are going to totally explode. And then all of that oil and those cell parts are going to come to the hair, and then the hair is going to draw it up, and then it'll spread out on the surface of the skin. Now, the point of this oily secretion, which, by the way, is called sebum, that's why they are sebaceous glands, is to lubricate your skin and keep it soft. It also is there to help inhibit the growth of bacteria. Now, bacteria love holocrine secretions because they have lots of fats and proteins in them, unlike watery secretions. So you will always find bacteria trying to get to the source of a fatty secretion. So oftentimes bacteria will go down the hair follicle right to the sebaceous gland, and then your immune system has to come and fight them. And so what happens is you end up with a pimple. That's what a pimple is. It's a war between bacteria that are trying to get into your sebaceous gland, and they're trapped in the hair follicle fighting and being fought by your immune system. Okay? The other kind of exocrine gland we're going to talk about is a sweat gland. And there are 2 categories of sweat gland: Apocrine sweat glands and Eccrine sweat glands. So again, sebaceous glands are going to make the sebum, and they're going to put it on a hair follicle. Now, in some areas of your body, you have a separate sebaceous follicle where it skips the hair part altogether, and it has its own larger sebaceous gland that has a duct that goes directly to the surface. Now, these are also prone to get pimples on them, and you're going to find them on particular areas of the body after puberty, like your face, your neck, your back, your chest, your nipples, and your external genitalia. So if you know that when you turn into a teenager, you got lots of acne, or you may have even gotten backne, you're probably having sebaceous follicles that are getting infected with the bacteria. So here's the difference between a sebaceous gland associated with the hair and a sebaceous follicle that just sends the sebum to the surface. And again, both of them can get infected and form some sort of a pimple. Okay, sweat glands. Now these are kind of fun to talk about. You have two kinds. The Eccrine sweat gland uses Eccrine secretion. And remember, that means they merely put the sweat into little vesicles and then poop, open them up outside the cell, okay? So the cells themselves aren't hurt. Not only that, but the sweat that these glands make is really pretty much just salt water, okay? 99% water with salt and a few metabolic wastes in it. Now, they're little on the model in the lab. They were like little cute little white coiled balls with a little white duct going to the surface. And these are the ones that are responsible for most of our sensible perspiration. They are all over your body, especially on your hands and feet, and they are there to cool you off. So you use evaporation of the water, of the sweat, to take away heat energy that has been on your skin. You also secrete electrolytes or some salts in there, and they also help protect you from environmental hazards. Okay, so these are the fine, non-stinky, just simply salty sweat glands. Now, apocrine sweat glands, you know from their name that they're going to use apocrine secretion. So parts of membranes are going to get trapped in the secretion. These are going to be found only in your armpits, around your nipples, and in the pubic region. Now, with the exception of around nipples, the two things that armpits and pubic region have in common are hairs. So they're going to secrete their products onto hair follicles, okay? And their product is, and this is Eccrine secretion. I'm sorry, I think that's a typo. It's supposed to be apocrine secretion. They are going to make a thick, protein-filled, lipid-filled secretion that is odorless. What? Yep, it's odorless. But there are going to be thousands or millions or billions of bacteria living on the hairs in the armpits and pubic area. And they love to eat this apocrine sweat. And when these bacteria eat this apocrine sweat with this high fat and high protein content, are you ready? They fart. And bacterial farts are what make these areas of your body have body odor. So it's really not you. It's the bacteria that are eating this specially fatty protein-filled sweat and farting on you. And you even have little muscle cells, myoepithelial cells, that when you are stressed out, squeeze the sweat out extra efficiently in response to your stress response. So if you've ever had a job interview and you were on your way to the interview and your pits were soaked and you went, oh my gosh, I smell so bad, you can blame your apocrine sweat glands. Now, we do several things to try to knock down the odor. Number one, females do this, men don't. We get rid of the hair. We will pluck, shave, wax, tweeze. We don't care. The hair's gone. We figure no hair, no bacteria, no smell. Yeah, except one thing. Even if you have a little bit of stubble, you can still fit millions of bacteria on that stubble. Okay? We shower. Whenever we take a shower, we are able to kill many of the bacteria, but bacteria double in number every 20 minutes. So even if you just leave a few bacteria behind, or God forbid you wipe yourself with a bacteria-covered used towel, you're just seeding yourself with more bacteria, okay? So then we go on to products, and we add deodorant or antiperspirant. Now, deodorant is a waxy substance that simply tries to cover up the bacterial fart with a smelling good smell. Okay, it doesn't change anything about your body chemistry. It doesn't stop anything from happening. It just tries to cover up a bad smell with a good smell. And then you have antiperspirants. Now, antiperspirants are designed with aluminum salts in them. And when you rub them in your armpits, they jam the aluminum salts onto the openings of the sweat gland ducts. So they don't let this kind of sweat out. So they don't let you perspire. That's why they're called antiperspirants. perspirate. Now, it solves the problem. However, after years and years and years of not letting that sweat out in your armpits, it can start to lead to some issues. Okay, so there have been some links. There's nothing official yet, but there have been some links between different kinds of cancers. And just overall, since you sweat to get rid of waste, it's probably not a good idea to trap that sweat inside those glands and not let it out. Okay, just my 2 cents worth. Okay, other glands are mammary glands, which in women who have had babies will be producing milk. They are modified sweat glands. And ceruminous glands. Ceruminous glands exist inside the ear canal and they produce earwax, which in anatomy is called cerumen. And this is a sticky, thick, waxy substance that traps particles and tries to keep insects from reaching your eardrum. All right, last accessory structure we're going to talk about in this chapter is nails. And the job of nails are to protect your tools, your digits. This is what you do most of things with, your fingers and toes. And it's made of dead cells that have been filled up with keratin, just like the stratum corneum. Now, we can diagnose some metabolic disorders by looking at a person's nails. For example, if you look at their nails and they have little pits in them, they may have a condition known as psoriasis. So, the nail has a nail body that sits on top of a nail bed. Down the sides of the nail are lateral nail grooves, and the skin comes over the grooves in lateral nail folds. On the edge of the nail underneath, that little membrane is called the hyponychium or hyponychium. Comes from onyx, which is the prefix that means nail. And you grow your nails in a little fold that's called the nail root. It's way down by the bone of your finger. And it takes a long time to grow a nail. It takes longer to grow toenails than fingernails. And where the nail finally breaches the epidermis, there is going to be a part called the eponychium or cuticle. And right there, we're not going to have any blood vessels. So we're going to see a little pale crescent shape called the lunula. And you can see luna means moon. It looks like a crescent moon. So here is our nail from above. The free edge is here. This is the body of the nail. The lunula is here. The cuticle or eponychium is here. This would be my lateral nail fold of skin, and that would be my lateral nail groove. If we look at it side view, here is the bone in the end of the finger. The nail root is all the way down here. Now notice, there is at least a third of the nail underneath the skin, only 2/3 sticking out. And then here's that little membrane that hurts so bad if you break it, the hyponychium underneath the nail. Okay, so we're also going to talk about injury repair specific to the integumentary system, okay? So if you break your skin, some things might happen. If you break a capillary in the papillary layer, you're going to have bleeding, and you're going to have swelling, and you're going to have pain, just like we saw in chapter 4, the end. We might have the inflammatory response. The blood will form a clot that will eventually become a scab. And then we have macrophages that come in and clean it up. And we have fibroblasts and endothelial cells that invade. And they're going to produce granulation tissue. Granulation tissue will be different from the tissue that broke in that we will put a lot more collagen in it to try to reinforce it. Our body will say, oops, we cut or ripped here. We need to have it stronger. Then, as we're making this new granulation tissue, we begin to make it from the bottom up. The clot begins to dissolve and dry out. Eventually, it will fall off at the surface. The number of capillaries will go down, and you can have non-cellular scar tissue. Again, extra collagen. Some people are genetically programmed to put extra tissue above the surface of the epidermis, and it's a different kind of puffy scar called a keloid. So here we go. We have a little cut on the forehead here. So first thing that happens is we broke blood vessels because we're down in the dermis, and those blood vessels are going to bleed into the gap and fill it up with blood. That blood will become one giant blood clot. It will fill up from all the way there to the top of the epidermis. Now that blood clot will dry and become a scab. Macrophages and fibroblasts will come in from the bottom and start converting the dried scab into granulation tissue and making more and more collagen fibers in there. Then, as we finish up and put more and more collagen and more granulation tissue, we begin pushing the blood clot up to the surface, and eventually we push it out. Now, it may not end up looking exactly the same, so you see all this extra collagen caused a depression in the skin that is a scar. And if you are prone to make a keloid instead of the skin going down like that, it will tend to puff out like that. All right, I think this is the last slide for chapter 5. So this is just a summary of some of the things we talked about for the integumentary system. I'm not going to go over it. This is something you can go over in your free time. All right, so that's all the PowerPoints for Unit 2, guys. Happy studying, and I hope you do well on Monday's exam.